How can we survive 4 more years of Biden when he can't even make it through a scripted speech? Watch.
4 more years. Pause.
4 more years. 4 more years. 4 more years.
I wonder if North America's building trade unions regretted their endorsement of Biden yesterday while he was speaking to them. Or maybe it doesn't matter, because while we all just watched Biden accidentally read the pause cue, which is supposed to tell him to pause for a chance of 4 more years, the official White House transcript appears to be airbrushing that little snafu out of the written record. Because instead of the transcript showing the word pause when Biden said it, it says inaudible. Yeah, sure, that pause was as clear as day. But seriously, how are we going to survive 4 more years of this clown? Because you know what Biden is now promising all of us after forgiving student debt loans? Well, he's raising our taxes, and by our taxes, I mean on anyone making less than $400,000 a year, something he promised over and over again that he would never do. Read his lips. Biden posted the other day to X quote, "Donald Trump was very proud of his $2 trillion tax cut that overwhelmingly benefited the wealthy and biggest corporations and exploded the federal debt. That tax cut is going to expire. If I'm reelected, it's going to stay expired," end quote. Not only is it a lie for Biden to say that the Trump tax cuts exploded the federal debt when it actually increased government tax revenue, it's an even bigger lie for him to argue that the tax cut only benefited the rich and therefore the whole thing needs to be done away with. Tim Carney over at the Washington Examiner has a really good write-up on this. Carney explains how the tax Trump cut was a massive middle-class tax cut that also cut the tax rate for the wealthy, but interestingly enough, actually shifted a greater portion of the tax burden onto the wealthy at the same time. He writes, quote, "The TCJA, or Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, doubled the child tax credit and the standard deduction while lowering everyone's tax rates. Letting this law expire would cut the standard deduction in half, cut the child tax credit in half, and increase everyone's marginal rates. Keep in mind that rich people don't use the standard deduction, and the child tax credit phases out for the wealthy. And so these tax hikes would really only hit the non-rich. A family of 5 earning $90,000, slightly below the median in Biden's home state of Delaware, would see its marginal tax rate jump from 12 to 15%, and would see its $6,000 in tax credits fall to $3,000 under the Biden plan. Biden would thus be hiking their federal income taxes from about $350 a year up to $2,875 a year," end quote. And keep in mind that he wants to do this while unleashing a massive border crisis, which is in itself a massive financial crisis as well, coming right off the heels of the COVID financial crisis and the Great Recession of 2008. Maybe that's why he wants to raise our taxes to pay for it all, especially with all his blue state sanctuary city buddies crying for more federal dollars to deal with the migration crisis in their own backyards, rather than just closing up the border and starting mass deportations. But aside from all that, check out this interesting comparison made by America 2100, the organization that friend of the show Nate Hochman is the senior advisor for. They argue, quote, "There is a pretty remarkable crossover between people who are giddy about AI wiping out tens of millions of low-skilled American jobs and people who insist we need to bring in infinite low-skilled workers to do the jobs Americans don't want to do," end quote. The post includes 2 headlines from CNN, one that says these businesses say they can't keep up with consumer demand without immigrant workers. Americans just don't want the jobs. And the other which says the robots are coming for your job too. Now, I know this debate splits even the right, with some wanting roadblocks in place to prevent artificial intelligence from taking too many jobs, especially after we just imported millions of low-skilled immigrants both legally and illegally, and others saying that we need to let the market figure this out, just like the Industrial Revolution first caused chaos and then ultimately worked to the advantage of society. But Daryl Cooper of my favorite podcast, Martyr Made, has a very important distinction to draw here. He argues, quote, "America got through the transition with relatively few problems because we had a lot of space, no external pressures or threats, and because the Industrial Revolution took nearly a century to complete its work. And even then, thousands were killed in labor conflicts, presidents were assassinated by anarchists, and when the whole thing broke down in the 1930s, we threw out our constitutional system to keep things on the rails. Because we avoided the worst catastrophes here, we have a rose-colored view that letting the chips fall where they may will always lead to the best outcomes. Many other countries did not share our unique advantages, and the Industrial Revolution brought them revolution, fascism, communism, and chaos. If not for the US, all of Europe would have gone fascist or communist, and the rest of the world with it. At least during the Industrial Revolution, people driven from the countryside into the cities had millions of jobs waiting for them whose IQ and skill requirements were within familiar reach. The auto industry alone was able to directly or indirectly provide jobs for around 20% of the US population at its height. The great companies resulting from the current revolution are Facebook, Nvidia, etc., which employ a few tens of thousands of high-skill, high IQ workers, while the profits resulting from tech-driven job destruction are not cycled back into growing a domestic industrial base to soak up displaced workers, but are siphoned off to Wall Street in the stream of global capital, end quote. So what does that mean for us now? Pretty scary, right? With an entire fifth column imported here for the freebies, which they expect American workers to provide for them with the sweat of their brow. It's hard enough as it is to find a good paying job right now to afford the cost of living these days. Do you think that dynamic is going to get radically better anytime soon? Seems like it's only getting worse. And not only did the $95 billion foreign aid sellout deal fund Ukraine's border while completely ignoring ours, it turns out it also included a few $billion to help fund the Biden administration's plans to set up international field offices in Qatar and Turkey to facilitate even more mass migration from those places into our country.